GTA 5 Roleplay is amazing. It has created a pocket in gaming that is unlike anything else. It allows individuals to create and live their characters in a world where you can interact with other people and take part in player-driven stories. But of course, we are not here to glaze and talk about how magical of an experience it is. What is interesting is the conflict that this virtual world creates and the aftermath that follows. See, I've been watching NoPixel since March 2019-ish, which was the first time I was exposed to this world and its potential for entertainment. And through the hundreds and hundreds of hours of addiction, I noticed a very obvious and consistent pattern. Mauled. People obviously get mad at video games. You flip a chair, you yell and scream, you punch a monitor sometimes. I've been there. But this recurring mauled in GTA RP was different. Clashes between characters in an RP server would turn into all-out war in-game, but outside of the game it was way worse. Streamers and their communities would collide in what was the equivalent of tribal frenzies, and in no other interactions, in my opinion, was this as prevalent as it was between the criminals and the cops of the server. It happened often. It happened for years, and sooner or later, it will happen again.
Even though the existence of Onyx has definitely reduced the chances, and cops seem to have a different mentality towards arrests, but we don't know yet because guns and crime haven't taken over the server yet.
These problems are old and cyclical. It has been going on for years, especially during my time watching 2.0 and 3.0. It has created hostility between streamers and their communities, and despite the efforts of the police and the Crims to talk and resolve their issues in and out of character, people keep on making
stupid fucking mistakes, man.
It even continued after the server was wiped and reset. As an avid gamer, not just an RP fan, this intrigues me because other gaming ecosystems don't have scenarios and issues quite like these. This is why I want to focus on the balancing aspect of interactions and power dynamics between the cops and the crims in the server, because it is the most interesting, controversial, and relevant. It is clear that no one, cops, crims, or management, want any of this to happen, but from my observations, I think their attempts have worked only partially, and it will happen again sooner or later. So, the purpose of this video is to not point fingers at individuals or groups. It's to explore whether there are more stable balancing solutions or approaches that will bring long-term stability and avoid these pockets of very bad interactions that have occurred for years. Amongst a lot of other things, role-playing can be driven by players, or created by progression systems, etc. When RP is player-driven, people are encouraged to stay in character and role-play their interactions, following certain rules or guidelines to maintain the game world's realism and immersion. Narratives and storytelling are created, which are often driven by players and can change unpredictably based on player actions. As a result, you get pockets of pure RP, where players are motivated by the outcomes of events and interactions rather than what a system or a server mechanic would provide. The mayoral campaign at the beginning of 4.0 is a good example where players experience the thrill, the drama, and the fun of simply role-playing, nothing else. However, RP servers still depend on the MMO systems to work properly, because these systems provide the context, the motivation, and the means for players to roleplay their characters and their stories. Bank jobs and the different crime systems or civilian jobs are MMO features that make players interact but also create opportunities for newer RP, such as planning, executing, facing the consequences, etc. The systems and mechanics create challenges, conflicts, and rewards for the players, which make role-playing more engaging and meaningful over a longer period of time. The reason I feel like I need to create a distinction between RP generated by, say, MMO systems and player-driven RP is because I think the problems causing bad conflict and drama between cops and crims is fundamentally a systems and design issue, not just an RP issue. I believe the solution to these conflicts isn't as simple as telling players to, okay, go figure it out in RP or create new RP rules and SOPs every time bad interactions happen. In my view, the solutions to these problems need to be embedded into the server and be structural in nature to some degree. I think that RP rules created to fix potential power imbalance issues does not work consistently over longer periods of time and only act like Band-Aid rather than an attempt to introduce long-term stability. Okay, so with all that out of the way, we can finally dive into the nature of the problem, right? Unlike traditional MMORPGs, the identity of GTRP is rooted in a world that is hyper-realistic, and this makes the balancing more unorthodox in nature. For example, RP servers may have their own lore, factions, economy, jobs, and systems that reflect real-life aspects of society, politics, culture, and crime. So a certain level of power imbalance between cops and criminals isn't just inevitable, it is necessary. Reflecting the fact that police forces are equipped with more resources and authority than the average citizen or criminal improves the immersion, allowing players to experience a world that closely resembles the actual dynamics of society, law enforcement, and criminal activities. As a result, criminals or civilians need to think before committing a crime. The whole point is to somewhat reduce the video gamey and arcadey feeling and ground the actions and consequences into reality. So, to maintain immersion and stay true to what an RP server is and should be, this sacrifice in balancing is made, and the imbalances are generally accepted.
Comes great responsibility.
Okay, so this is going to sound like I am pointing fingers at the PD, but I assure you I'm not. What I'm trying to do is kind of follow the breadcrumbs of actions and consequences because I will explain why no one's to blame. The high stakes of criminal actions mean that punishments for being caught involves a loss of resources and time, which can be significant depending on the crime and scenario, right? When one faction or side gains an advantage over the other and can control consequences, this dynamic can lead to significant frustrations and problems amongst the disadvantaged players. First, we can go through some scenarios that have historically molded criminals, right? Spam tasing and double cuffing, classic, particularly when there's one criminal but multiple cops. Ramming suspects into walls, bank breaches, which could be realistic but always has drama surrounding them. The use of helicopters has also caused a fair amount of irritation in many situations, as have bad traffic stops where officers appear more focused on issuing the heaviest fines rather than engaging in meaningful interaction or conversations. Many of these actions fall under the try-hard category, implying that some individuals are using the powers available to them to win an encounter. And these, by the way, are not my personal opinions, they are simple observations. So this frustration can lead to toxicity in the interactions between players and their communities, especially since NoPixel is a streamer server. Don't get me wrong, there are other types of interactions that have produced equally bad outcomes, but within the context of Crim versus cops, the events and outcomes I mentioned are prevalent. So, a power imbalance results in unhealthy competition, where the weaker side, as a result, has to use excessive force or suboptimal strategies to compensate for this lack of resource and power. This creates unrealistic and unfavorable situations in the game. For example, mag dump season, where cops will get gunned down every corner, and unrealistic escape strategies and a lot of other stuff. Regardless of who is at fault, one thing is clear: the immersion and enjoyment is reduced for both the players and the viewers. The vocal minorities of communities become annoyed on behalf of their streamers and go rabid on YouTube and Reddit, and the cycle continues. I do have a few theories about why things like these happen and why it's not necessarily anyone's fault, especially the cops. Regardless of your objective in the server, when you assume a role, you naturally want to be good at it, right? Take a lawyer, for example. They're trying to be better than other lawyers. If a person runs a material business, they would want all the mechanic shops to buy mats from them and not others, etc. This desire to excel is obvious. Criminals aim to successfully commit crimes without getting caught and punished, while cops aim to apprehend and punish criminals. Wanting to improve in what you're doing is a natural part of progression, right? And yes, even though not everything is about progression, it's challenging to expect players to underperform in any role. Players are simply trying to advance their objectives. But what happens when cops, who are already more powerful, also try to be better at their jobs? You end up with bank breaches, spam tasing, helicopters with 1 million fuel, 8 officers in a chase. Now, the question is it fair to blame the cops, the PD, the law enforcement? They're just trying to be better, like the rest of the server. Even though it is extremely easy to point fingers at the PD for some sort of misconduct, I think it's kind of unfair to do so because the problem is complicated and blaming others does not solve anything. One of the first instincts to fix issues like these would be what? Equipment adjustment. The logic is straightforward. If police helicopters are too dominant, change the numbers. If cars are too fast, change the numbers. But see, the thing is, by number tweaking the equipment, you're addressing the imbalance directly. Something we discussed is necessary. I mentioned my reasoning behind the inherent power difference and its necessity for the game's structure. Attempting to level the playing field by constantly modifying equipment stats beats the very purpose of cops being powerful in the first place. If you directly influence the power levels, you're compromising the immersion of being a cop and lowering the stakes for criminals. If criminals and cops are equally matched in any capacity, criminals would have the upper hand in escaping all the time, which we have seen many times, by the way. The same can be applied for introducing new SOPs and legislations as a way to balance and control certain actions and behavior. SOPs are very, very undeniably necessary for structure and order, but they alone do not offer a long-term solution to balancing issues. New rules not only try to control how police should behave, but also introduce a lot of gray areas of interpretation. When can the PD use spike strips? When should you use a heli? How long should you let a chase go on, etc.? The PD barrier era was a very good example of this. So, essentially, at some point in 3.0, I think, cops were allowed to use barriers for scene control to try to prevent crims from picking up their friends who got shot down or rescue boost cars, right? But this led to massive drama about the appropriate use of force behind these barriers because different people had different ideas about what should be or shouldn't be standard procedure. Instead of simplifying scene control, the new rules created more gray areas, giving room for different interpretations and increased conflict. I think the solutions to these issues lie well beyond enforcing expectations or tweaking SOPs. The focus should be on enhancing the versatility of police roles and exploring alternative solutions. In my opinion, maybe a hot take, SOPs should allow cops to be as strict or lenient as they want, but other factors should be introduced to balance this out. In my opinion, it is a server's responsibility to introduce solutions that stop tryhard and W cops from ruining RP without trying to make cops less tryhard. I know, that sounds like a contradiction. The SOPs should reflect the complexity of real-life policing scenarios, making the role of a cop in the game more dynamic and less restricting. Creating limitations through SOPs does not give long-term and reliable results. The same problems come back every few months. So the idea is essentially to explore options without directly compromising the concept of cops having all the flexibility they need to conduct realistic police work. Now, if that sounds very difficult to do, well, I made a video to tell you it is. It is impractical to expect cops in RP to consistently go easy or intentionally prolong RP interactions out of consideration for criminals or anyone. Holding such standards across a large player base over an extended period of time is unrealistic, primarily because it ventures into the realm of interpretation. When it comes to rules and regulations with a lot of gray areas, especially where one side, the cops, can enforce different ideas and interpretations, it can lead to inconsistency and confusion. One day, some cops might handle situations leniently, but the next day, some other cops will be a tryhard on the exact same situation. It's unrealistic and unreliable to expect players to consistently create high-quality roleplay to maintain balance. All the methods that have been tried so far will not be enough on their own.
Like and subscribe, please.
See, criminals aren't really limited to one playstyle. Sure, most of their activities are criminal in nature, but they have various modes, ways, avenues, options for engaging in crime. Being a Crim isn't solely about whether you rob banks. There are many roleplay possibilities in progressing from petty crime to drug and gun trading, or establishing relationships with gangs to conduct other businesses, etc. The relative variety available to this group of players allows for different styles of crims to exist. Not all criminals are Southside gang members, and not all engage in bank heists, etc. They are usually not confined or limited to a single type of activity or skill set. Being a powerful and respected individual or group depends on your resources, connections, your combat skills, your ability to accumulate wealth, or at least some combination of these factors. But in the realm of law enforcement, the identities and experiences of police officers are less diverse compared to those of the criminals. Why? This stems from the fact that an officer's primary role revolves around countering criminal activities. Sure, there might be various departments and cops might choose to participate more in court RP or follow up on investigations and figure out other happenings around the city, but these elements do not substantially diversify what they do. On average, criminals engage, participate, and create much more RP because of the wider range of activities and systems available for them to do so. What I'm essentially saying is, criminals do not need to be hyper-fixated on a few objectives, and they don't need to uphold the same standards as cops do. Unlike criminals, who can utilize their rewards from bank robberies or drug trafficking to reinvest in various other mechanics and systems, police officers cannot use their rewards to progress somewhere that would be equally as rewarding as stopping crime. But crims can do that. They have multiple progression paths that can be equally enjoyable, especially late game. Okay, so think about this. Imagine yourself as a cop. Your day-to-day life revolves around what? Catching criminals. Whether it's responding to a bank job, pulling someone over, or sitting in a meeting talking about charges, your focus is clear. You are there to stop crime. But what happens when this is what you do 80-90% of the time? You run the risk of quote-unquote stopping crime becoming your identity. If you're a cop main, I don't see how over time you wouldn't become a try-hard cop. You are living, breathing this one thing. How would you even know when to go easy or when to go hard? So we already know that RP servers are trying to replicate the power level of IRL law enforcement to maintain this realism. What is not being replicated is the potential stakes and danger of being an IRL police officer, especially in dealing with all sorts of criminals. Criminals already experience risk through the fact that cops are more powerful than them and the fact that they lose a lot of time and resources if they get caught for a crime. But when cops take action in GTRP, they often face less significant consequences. They don't have to weigh their decisions with the same level of gravity because their actions don't require as much investment in terms of time and resources. And without experiencing real danger and high stakes themselves, how can cops fully understand the impact of their actions on criminals? This disparity can lead to some cops pushing the limits without fully appreciating the repercussions. But this is only one of many arguments. So the second issue, arguably more important, is that server mechanics and systems for police are tilted towards crime-fighting activities. Now, police officers 1000% do engage in a variety of roleplay scenarios and interact with the community in many ways. But the structure of the server tends to funnel them back towards crime fighting, right? This is especially bad during late game when there is crime everywhere, so all cops are doing are chasing pings and responding to calls. This lack of variety in cop progression systems create an idea that stopping crime is the only job of the police, which is not true. The police of the server also have an OOC role of regulating roleplay. I mean, the police interact with a lot of people around the server, but these interactions rarely provide long-term, tangible progression that is as rewarding as responding to crimes. But why long-term and tangible? What's the point of that? It allows cops to stop over-investing themselves into the idea of being this hero. If catching criminals is not the only way for cop to progress, then the power dynamic potentially shifts in a way that's more balanced. Cops are now less incentivized to use unnecessary force or aggression. It creates other channels of long-term RP and potentially introduces new perspectives. It allows them to experience the risk-reward we talked about, which creates new experiences. It allows cops to be proactive and create RP, not just to be reactive to other people's RP. Without depth, how are cadets supposed to learn the nuances of cop versus crim? They might not fully explore or realize the potential for varied interactions and scenarios outside the typical them versus us narrative. I strongly believe that cadet training should prioritize being a good role player over being a good cop. It is entirely possible to discourage bad behavior while also trying to explain the level of strictness the police need to maintain for the sake of realism and immersion. Introducing a diverse set of systems is essential not just for the variety's sake, but to improve the depth and longevity of RP experience. The variety prevents burnout and keeps the experience fresh and engaging. So, I have yapped about progression systems, this and that, but my suggestions are not without its problems. Let's say we have successfully expanded the range of activities for cops. Depending on how these other activities are implemented, there's a chance that cops might not show up for conventional crimes like banks or boosts anymore. Their attention could shift towards these newer activities. However, this potential shift in focus is more of a matter of how this idea is implemented and not a flaw with the idea itself, in my opinion. It's a balancing act. The key here is to make sure that responding to crimes remains one of the more rewarding and engaging aspects of being a cop. The goal of introducing new avenues, progression, and stuff to do, the goal isn't to take police away from crime. Another problem with my suggestions is that they are not easy to put in the server. It would probably take months of planning and coding, and the idea behind policing in an RP server would probably need to be reconstructed. In the same vein, I would like to explore some of these suggestions in detail, but I can't shake the feeling that they would sound absolutely terrible on paper. I mean, for example, I think the concept of a dedicated forensics department is pretty cool. If the server theoretically has a deep investigation system, a forensics department could significantly enhance RP within the PD. Another suggestion is each PD department having its own unique set of skills, progression paths, and specialized equipment. This would increase interdepartmental cooperation, similar to how selling chopped car parts requires access to a different region which is only accessible by crowbars, which you can get from a completely different progression path. So, the RP and interaction is increased as a result, all that stuff. A department reputation system could work really well too. Departments would gain or lose reputation based on different criteria, but for this to work properly, each department would require a counterpart in the criminal ecosystem as well. This is to make sure that changes in PD have a meaningful impact on the criminal world and vice versa. In my opinion, another universally good suggestion would be utilizing the north side of the map for both crime and cop activities. If Sandy and Polito have their own civ and crime ecosystem, then there would be a legitimate reason for PD to exist up there as well. Currently, these areas are underutilized. And finally, some last words to wrap this up. I do believe that making any similar overhauls to the server is outside the scope of the current dev team, which is fine. It is, however, fun to talk about and explore controversial issues and ideas in a non-controversial and exploratory manner. And that was kind of the idea behind this video.